In the summer of 1904, the Olympic Games came to America for the first time and produced what may be the most absurd athletic contest ever held. This is the full story of the St. Louis Marathon. Rat poison, a stolen victory, runaway dogs and all. The games that year were a sideshow, literally. They were tacked onto the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, stretched across nearly 5 months, and were so tangled up with the fair that historians later had to sort out which events had even been Olympic. The man running athletics for the fair was James E. Sullivan, and he decided the marathon should double as an experiment in what was then called purposeful dehydration, the era's interest in studying how athletes cope with minimal water. So he kept water on the course to almost nothing. So, on a course of nearly 25 miles, water was available at essentially one point, a well around mile 12. The course itself compounded the crime: 7 hills, unpaved country roads inches deep in dust, and a start time of just after 3 in the afternoon, in 90-degree heat. 32 men lined up. A handful were genuine marathoners. The rest included middle-distance runners, total novices, and some of the most remarkable characters in Olympic history. Exhibit A. Felix Carvajal, a Cuban postman barely 5 feet tall. He had raised his travel money back home and, by most accounts, lost all of it gambling in New Orleans, hitchhiking the rest of the way to St. Louis. He arrived at the start in street clothes. A fellow athlete took scissors to his trousers at the knee. Carvajal was a celebrated endurance runner back home, but he had no marathon training and by most accounts hadn't properly eaten in about 40 hours. Exhibits B and C. Len Taunyan and Jan Mashiani, Tswana men from South Africa, in St. Louis as part of the fair's Boer War exhibit. By entering the marathon, they became the first black Africans to compete in any Olympic Games. At 3:03 p.m., fair president David Francis fired the starting gun and 32 men ran into the furnace. The support cars, carrying officials and doctors, drove both ahead of and behind the runners, on unpaved roads that were never cleared of ordinary traffic. The cars churned up thick clouds of dust. Runners were left coughing and choking, and some were overcome around the halfway point. It nearly killed one of them. William Garcia of California was found collapsed on the roadside. The dust he had swallowed had torn at his stomach lining. He was rushed to a hospital and survived. The dogs got Len Taunyan. Somewhere mid-race, he was chased nearly a mile off course. He recovered, rejoined, and still finished 9th. His countryman Mashiani came in 12th. Then there was Fred Laws, a New York bricklayer who cramped up around mile 9. His manager gave him a lift, and Laws rode the next 11 miles, famously waving at spectators and runners as he passed them. When the car broke down near mile 19, Laws was feeling refreshed, so he got out and jogged the rest of the way in. He entered the stadium to a roar. The crowd believed it was watching the winner. The charade made it all the way to the ceremony. Alice Roosevelt, the president's daughter, had placed the laurel wreath on Laws's head and was posing with him for photographs. When word arrived from the course that he'd covered 11 miles by automobile, the cheering turned to booing on the spot. The real leader was Thomas Hicks, a brass worker from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he was in trouble. 10 miles out, he had begged his handlers for water. Honoring Sullivan's experiment, they gave him a sponge soaked in warm distilled water to suck on. 7 miles from the finish, they went further. A dose of strychnine sulfate, rat poison used in tiny amounts as a stimulant in that era, mixed into raw egg whites. It was not against the rules. There were no rules. Hicks kept fading, so they dosed him again, washed down this time with French brandy. He began to hallucinate, insisting the finish was still 20 miles away, begging to lie down. In the last stretch, his eyes were glazed and his feet were shuffling. His trainers stepped in and supported him over the line, his legs still pumping through the motions of running in mid-air. 3 hours, 28 minutes, 53 seconds. Still the slowest winning time in Olympic marathon history. Hicks was carried off the field. By contemporary accounts, it took 4 doctors the better part of an hour to bring him around, and he had lost some 8 pounds over the course of the race. Writers have noted since that another dose of strychnine could well have killed him. Carvajal, meanwhile, had treated the race as a social occasion, chatting with spectators along the route. Famished, he detoured into an orchard and ate apples that turned out to be rotten. Cramps followed, So did a rest by the roadside. He got up, rejoined the race, and finished fourth. Laws swore the car ride had been a practical joke. He'd never meant to accept the victory. The AAU banned him for life, reinstated him within the year, and in 1905 he won the Boston Marathon. On foot, as far as anyone knows. Of 32 starters, 14 finished, the fewest finishers of any Olympic marathon. The race was considered such a disaster that there were open calls to drop the marathon from the Games entirely. Instead, the marathon survived, and in time, the sport wrote rules against nearly everything that happened in St. Louis. The doping, the cars, the single well at mile 12. Every water station on every marathon course today is, in its way, a small monument to 1904. This has been history's fine print. Sources on screen and in the description.